According to a recent study on couples counseling, nearly 40% of couples who get through it are divorced within 4 years of attending. And I've seen other reports that say that only 50% of couples who get through couples counseling, they don't stay together long term. Now, in the therapy world, couples counseling is known for having notoriously bad outcomes for couples in crisis. And I think what this data shows us is that the information that we learn does not equal transformation or the creation of a new lived experience. And these studies don't even take into consideration all the couples who don't meet the criteria for couples counseling in the first place, which requires both spouses to participate equally and in the same way. So this video is for you if you want help in your marriage, but couples counseling has not worked for you, or if your spouse doesn't want counseling for whatever reason. I'm going to share with you the 6 reasons why the traditional couples counseling model does not work well for couples in crisis. And then I'm going to share with you the 5 things that you need to transform your struggling marriage that are way more effective and way less time consuming in changing the narrative of your relationship permanently. Okay, so the first thing about traditional couples counseling is that it's very focused on the problem. It comes from the diagnostic model, which is to focus on the symptoms of the problem, to really be able to describe those, to analyze the problem, try to remove the problem, which requires engaging in it throughout the process. Now, while I do think it's important to start with a description of the problematic patterns and the dysfunction, you don't want to stay there, right? Because staying in the paradigm of the problem keeps you stuck. The reason for this is that what we focus on expands. So sitting down and rehashing everything in the session until the session is over, scratching the surface of resentment and opening up the wound, then going home until the next week, right? That oftentimes makes things more strained and raw and confusing for couples. And therapists in this model, they just end up witnessing what goes on at home in their office, right? It just gets played out in front of them, but nothing really changes. Because it's so problem-focused, you don't get any real motivation or hope or traction moving forward. Number 2 is that the standard of couples counseling is that both spouses have to be equally involved, right? And that causes you to ignore the power that you alone have, but it also perpetuates this idea that you can only make changes if the external circumstances are right. In other words, if my spouse agrees on this exact path forward and comes and sits with me right here each week, only then am I willing to work on my marriage. Only then am I willing to work on my side of the street. That gives away your power to the other person to make a decision that's based on the history, right? They're going based off of information that does not make them feel hopeful about the marriage. So if you have a leaning out spouse and you know that they're making decisions about the future based on what they know about the past, and you're trying to get them to have hope based on only what is real, and being realistic means only more of the same. It's backwards. It's backwards to think that you should be changing their headspace about the marriage before the marriage has changed enough to create that new headspace. So requiring both people to have equal willingness to engage in the same modality leaves out a ton of couples that could be helped, which I personally think is a huge problem. And the third thing is that couples counseling is simply not a high enough level of care for couples that are in crisis. It's basically a Band-Aid when you need surgery. There's no spot coaching, there's no access to the therapist when you are struggling in the trenches, and most people working on themselves have minor stumbles, right? They have triggers or areas of confusion day to day, hour to hour, and if they have to wait another 5 to 7 days or 10 days before they can discuss it with their therapist, a lot of negative things can happen between now and then that are going to work against you. The fourth thing that couples counseling does is it basically overlooks the subconscious programming and the power that this has to derail you and sabotage you every time you get triggered, right? It may help you identify what's happening, but insight is not enough. You can't access what you know intellectually as soon as you go into fight or flight or when you go into shutdown mode. And traditional couples counseling, it will give you the information and give you the insights into why you're having this experience, what's actually happening, why your partner's acting that way, and even what to do instead. But it doesn't focus on helping you literally reprogram your default modes of relating at the root so that those triggers and those activations don't even happen in the first place. So while it helps with temporary change and it gives you a little bit of motivation and some aha moments, it does not promote deep and lasting transformation. That's why it has such poor long-term outcomes. Number 5 is that couples counseling really focuses disproportionately on communication before emotional connection. The thing about communication is, though, if you're not feeling safe or connected or seen and heard, you're not even going to be able to receive that communication as something coming from somebody who's on your side. You're going to hear it through a filter that keeps you in a me versus you paradigm. And you may have noticed this too, that no matter how perfectly you say something, it just doesn't land, right? Your spouse isn't hearing it the right way because the connection isn't there. And so the message is distorted, which is frustrating on both sides. It's funny because when I talk to couples, usually the first thing they tell me is, we have a communication problem. We need to learn how to communicate effectively. But upon further exploration, what I'm finding out is that it's really an emotional connection issue, because that lack of connection impacts the communication. That's the root cause. And so if you start with communication first, it's like putting the cart before the horse, or it's adding eggs to a cake recipe while it's already in the oven, right? The order that you do things in really matters. And finally, number 6 is there's no communication in couples work. It's done in isolation. And in fact, it's done as a secret for a lot of couples. They don't even want people to know that they're in counseling. That, of course, is in and of itself, that's a problem because of the stigma. But the deeper issue is that true up-leveling requires a like-minded community of people who are doing the same work, raising each other up, speaking the same language, and allowing each other to see through another's relationship how the same principles affecting their own relationship will apply to them, right? We learn so much from seeing how something that we're dealing with can be shifted through the eyes of another perspective when you yourself are not in the hot seat. Doing this work in isolation is actually going against how the brain works and how true transformation happens in relationships. So what do we do instead? What I have found really works, and I've been doing this for a lot of years now, is something that incorporates the following 5 principles. If you can incorporate this into the work that you're doing, you're really going to have a strong catalyzing effect on transforming your marriage, even if your spouse doesn't want to participate. The first thing you have to have is a vision-based approach that's very inside out. So rather than rehashing the problems and getting into all this stuff before you even have the tools to properly repair, you want to get really clear on what is your marriage vision? What is your destination? Because you're not going to get where you're going unless you know where that is. Focusing on just not having the problem that's in front of you right now is not enough. That's like getting into a taxi cab and saying, just don't take me to Times Square. We have to connect to a vision and transcend the current reality from the inside out by doing what you can individually and internally to be a match for that vision. So anytime we're trying to change our circumstances, we should be spending about 90% of our mental energy really thinking about what it is that we want, how do we need to be showing up to create that, and not just reacting to or talking about what isn't working. Now, a good vision is going to incorporate your life dreams. It's going to incorporate your values. It's going to be something that you as your best self can create and sustain for the long term. This vision is going to ensure that you never are just reacting, but you're coming from a very proactive place in a manner that's congruent with and in alignment with what your goals actually are. That way you never have anything to lose, right? Because you're in integrity with how you want to be in the world. It also broadens your perspective and it keeps you grounded in the daily actions that you need to take in order to build a better marriage. It also allows you to hold space for something better that maybe your leaning out spouse will see down the line, even if they don't see it now, and then they're going to want to join you. So you don't have to wait for them to be ready. If you have a strong vision and you're going inside out, you're not giving all the power to the person who's ambivalent or reluctant to get help. That doesn't really make any sense. Plus, you get to feel good about showing up for your values, and you get to show up for your marriage from the inside out no matter what. The second thing is for couples in crisis is you need to have something with much higher support than weekly or maybe 150-minute hour every 2 weeks. It's simply not enough, especially with traditional therapy when you don't have access to your therapist in between sessions. You have no support when you're in the trenches and struggling. So what you're going to want to do is find a therapist who works under a coaching umbrella, or they have a little bit more freedom in terms of how they structure their services so they're not bound by the insurance mandates, which are informed by that diagnostic model I was talking about earlier. That model is not client-centered. You need higher support, you need more sessions, you need spot coaching in between the sessions, and you need to have an intelligent plan of action to catalyze changes in your marriage. That could be a self-study program, or it could be like a group support. Sometimes you just need a reframe, right? Sometimes you just need coaching in between the sessions to prevent major setbacks that are going to lead to hopelessness in one or both of you. Now, the third thing you need is a therapist that understands how to change the subconscious programs at the root. Because like I talked about earlier, it doesn't really matter how much you know if you can't remember it the second you get triggered, right? And those triggers can change. We can change those permanently at the root because no amount of intellectual understanding or insight is going to be enough for lasting change unless you can go deep into those programs and reprogram them. So even CBT or Gottman-based therapy or emotion-focused therapy, they don't address how to change those subconscious programs and those automatic responses. So find somebody that knows how to activate both hemispheres of the brain at the same time to create a state that's going to allow you to internalize new core beliefs. That way you'll be able to create a new lived experience, especially if your spouse is doubtful that the changes that you're making are going to last. Now, this is key. Number 4 is you have to take into consideration an approach that will focus on emotional connection before communication. How to build that safety, how to help your spouse know that you're there for them, you're with them when they're in distress, or even if they're making lighthearted bids for connection, you're there and they feel that presence, and vice versa. Then you can repair old hurts. Then you can communicate about hot button issues once this is in place. But you want a therapist that's informed by attachment theory. They're going to know about the work of Dr. Sue Johnson, who wrote the book Hold Me Tight. And they're not going to just start your sessions with jumping into all the problems and then just keep going with the problems just for information or insight, right? They're going to really try to create a solid foundation of trust and safety and emotional connection so that you can have a different filter of your spouse and they can have a different filter of you. That's what's going to allow the communication to land. And you're going to be able to have the benefit of the doubt, and you're going to be able to come from a place of love and support. And the final thing, the 5th thing that you need, is a community of support and mentors who are in healthy relationships themselves, who walk the talk. They've been through difficulties and they've overcome them, so they really can help you stay the course and avoid the common pitfalls that they see coming ahead, right? And you want to be around others, peers who are doing the same work, speaking the same language, being informed by the same principles, and not only witnessing each other in their growth, but being a stand for your highest and healthiest best self. That's how all mastery works. If you want to up-level anything in your marriage, or if you want to up-level anything in your life, you don't do it in secret, right? You get with people who understand it. They might be farther along than you on a shared path. You immerse yourself in the communities who are living what you desire. This goes for anyone who's wanting greater physical health, spiritual health, people wanting to achieve big financial goals, anytime you're trying to create something qualitatively better in your life. We just are not wired to be in our own heads all the time and grow. If you want to grow, you cannot just keep things inside yourself, right? You have to be willing to be witnessed as you're figuring things out, not just afterwards. And you want to be in community with others who are leveling up at the same time. Trust me, it makes it so much easier. You can do it without this, but it's just going to take you way longer and it's going to be much, much harder. So that's it for today. If you liked this video, check out my other video called The 5 Shifts. And if you enjoy my content, please take a second to click the like button and subscribe so you won't miss any of my weekly marriage mastery videos. And if you want to book a free call to explore how we might be able to support you, you can check the pinned comment below. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you next time.